All right, Pete Giuliano. It is Saturday, August 22nd, 2015, and that makes this SolderSmoke number
179.
And it's a special anniversary edition.
Yes.
As we noticed the last time, this date marks 10 years of the SolderSmoke podcast. Hard to believe. Here we are, 10 years on. And I checked. I believe the actual first one went out 10 years ago yesterday. So this is the 10th anniversary. And I thought, and you agreed, I thought we should do a little bit of kind of a walk down SolderSmoke memory lane. Take a look back at the podcast. I have one clip. I think we should start with how it all started. A clip.
Yeah, I want to know. I want to know.
Oh, right. You know, I want to tell everybody, brace yourself for the audio quality because we've made quite a bit of improvement over the years, and, well, those improvements didn't start yet. Well, you'll hear this. Hold on a second. Let me take a second to get this going. Hold on.
Welcome to SolderSmoke, where we talk about all things electronic and geeky. We meet on Echolink and swap ideas related to workbench radio projects. If you have any questions about this podcast or suggestions for future casts, send a note to soldersmoke@yahoo.com. Our webpage is www.geocities.com/soldersmoke. As always, have fun, melt solder, and pass along your ideas. So let's get started. This is issue 1 of SolderSmoke. HBR in London, KL7R, you know. I was doing some research on podcast streams, and I ran across a podcast feed for the 2600 guys, and so I went and looked in there, and that wasn't so interesting. And then I went to 2600.com, and there was a bunch of audio MP3s they had there from it wasn't DEFCON, but it was something like that, and I was listening to a number of them. I was listening to these guys on 2600. Guy was in Mongolia, and they were doing an interview from him on a train. He was crossing Siberia, and so I was interested in that. And some guys running pirate FM radio, and so I listened to this guy that was I don't know if he's an analyst, but he did some work for CIA, and he was ragging on the intelligence leadership, and that was all interesting. So I kind of got interested in here. I'm thinking maybe there is some useful things we might be able to do there. KL7R.
Yeah, KL7R, M0HBR. Yeah, it's definitely got a lot of potential. I know about getting sidetracked by it. Same things happen to me. In terms of programs, I haven't really played with it too much, but the one that I did play with a little bit, a free program, kind of an audio editing program, Audacity. Audacity is a free download.
Yeah, and we're still with Audacity. There you go.
Wow.
That was kind of fun, huh?
Yeah. Well,
that was, of course, Mike, KL7R. Rest in peace. That was our first episode. And what I think I mentioned this last time, the way the whole thing started was Mike and I used to get together on Echolink and just talk about, as he said, talk about homebrew projects. And one day I mentioned to him that I'd come across this article in the British magazine New Scientist, and it was Software Kills the Radio Star. And it was about this new thing at the time called podcasts, and about how people were making their own radio programs and then posting them up onto the Internet, and people all around the world were listening. And Mike was a very kind of innovative guy, and he right away just took that, and the next time we talked, he kind of sent me some files, and that was SolderSmoke 1.
And the rest is history.
Here we are, 10 years later.
Hey, though, Bill, I almost feel slighted.
Why is that?
There's music on the front of the podcast. We don't have music on the front of the podcast.
We used to, and we've gone through various episodes. We had that for a long time, And then for a while we had some music that W8MOJ put together for us, custom made.
Ooh.
And we still have that at the end. It's still featured at the end. It's kind of a techno-synthesized kind of thing that Moj did, very, very creative. For a while we were using we were just pretty much stealing a couple of minutes from Steely Dan's IGY.
Oh, Steely Dan.
From the IGY, the International Geophysical Year.
Yeah.
So it got some important significance for us here on the show. We got to go back to some music at the beginning. Although I think people like it somehow if we get right to it.
Okay.
All right. Now, one thing I did is I had a lot of fun listening to that. But we have up on the site SolderSmoke.com a guide to all of the podcasts. All 179 of them now, with a little capsule summary of what we discussed. And I was just blown away by how much nonsense we have covered over this 10-year period. And I thought, and I'll just make some comments, Pete, and I know you've listened to all of them, so just chime in here, but I just wanted to I hope this will be a fairly quick walk down memory lane, but of course we had the first one. Then, as I went through it, I just jotted down things that I thought were memorable from a number of the episodes. In episode 16, Mike and I discuss the use of desitin as a heat sink compound. Desitin.
Yeah.
It's been a long time for you. It's been quite some time for me, too.
Yeah.
But that's basically the ointment that you put after you change the baby's diaper.
Yeah.
Right? And we discovered that it was also useful as a heat sink compound.
Wow.
If you don't have heat sink compound, you need something, you put that in there. And not only that, it fills the shack with a pleasant kind of babyish kind of aroma.
Yeah. I wonder who discovered that.
I don't know who discovered it, but it also makes me realize that in my workshop, all of my parts containers are formerly plastic baby wipes containers. They're perfect, so I'm still using that.
Repurposing.
Add some soul to the ham shack.
Yeah.
Okay. In 34, on October 7th, 2006, we were joined by Farhan from India. That was really cool. That was one of our coolest interviews, and we've got to do it again. It's been far too much time. It's been almost 10 years, wow. Farhan.
Wow.
We've got to get you back, but that was great fun, having Farhan come in from Hyderabad and talk to us about the things that he was up to at the time. In episode 46, I think we find the first mention of the Michigan Mighty Might.
Wow.
That was January 13, 2007, and sadly, that was the last podcast with Mike. That was it. We were talking about Michigan Mighty Might, but that was episode 46, and he was killed in the car crash in Hawaii shortly thereafter. Then we went through a long period where we didn't do any, and then we started, as I said, getting messages from guys saying, you really should start it up again. Mike would want this thing to continue, and of course they were right. So we were back. And by episode 48, on March 4th, 2007, I believe we have the first reference to the Knack, Dilbert's disease, which has become an important part of the SolderSmoke lexicon, the Knack. More about that later. The music. You mentioned the music. That started on March 18th, 2007 in episode 50, Moj's Music, M-O-J, the Moj. He gave us some great music. It's all synthesized. It's still playing at the end. We got to bring it back. You're right. Got to put it on the beginning. We have every once in a while we cover really unusual, dubious, probably not factually correct news stories, especially around a certain date. There's a date in which this is done. And in episode 52, which was not coincidentally around, that date, we covered a story about how the New Jersey state legislature had just come up with new legislation prohibiting the use of soldering irons in private homes. Created quite the uproar. I think Governor Christie's still getting letters on that one. The lawyers are still scratching their heads to see what can be done. The people were outraged. April 1st, 2007, I think that was. In episode 54, an interview with Tony Fishpool of the GQRP Club. Billy and I were out at the Kempton Park rally in London, and Tony was there, and we had a wonderful chat, and that was great fun. Episode 60, we hear mention, I think in the mailbag section, of somebody we would hear much more about much later on, Eric Schwartz, one of the founders of Elecraft, was there on May 27, 2007. In episode 66, we were on the air from Rome. October 13th, 2007, we had moved to Rome, and I recounted in that one my meeting in San Diego over the summer with Wes Hayward, W7ZOI. I had a great meeting with Wes. I really, really enjoyed that, and I talked about that in that podcast. In episode 76, we had one, I think, of a series of interviews with AG5RS, a home brewer who was at the time operating out of Dubai. Here's an important one. February 14th, 2008, episode 77. In the mailbag, I read a letter from this fellow with a call sign W6JFR. Who was W6JFR?
I was.
Oh, there you were. That was Pete Giuliano, W6JFR. He wrote in, and it was about, he was extolling the virtues of Italian craftsmanship.
Yeah.
You were. What was that? Do you remember what it was specifically?
No.
We'll have to go back and listen to it. I'm sure it was wonderful. In episode 84, we talk about the launch of the SolderSmoke Daily News blog. That was May 25th, 2008. Here's a guy who's come. There's so many people, and I really feel bad because we're not going to mention everybody. It's just impossible. There's so many, but one of the real stalwarts and frequent contributors to the podcast showed up in episode 102. That's Jim, AL7RV, new call sign W8NSA. And we had been talking about LT Spice and the use of simulators. And Jim very helpfully chimed in and said that he was going to work on building a smoke generator for LT Spice, so that when you did something that would cause a release of the smoke, that smoke would come pouring out of the speaker or the computer to give you a more an accurate electronic experience.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We're still waiting on that one, Jim. we need it. In 103, we had the first of, I think, a series of interviews with Jeff, KO7M. You'll remember Jeff. Jeff is the guy with the Piper Cub, that beautiful yellow Piper Cub that he takes flying around and he camps under the wing. And we just heard from him last week. He's doing well, so good to hear from you, Jeff. I don't think he's flying the Piper Cub anymore, but that was a lot of fun. In 106, we mentioned the launch of SolderSmoke, the book. SolderSmoke book, which has been great fun. I've had a lot of fun with that. And at the suggestion of my dear wife, Elisa, I mentioned to her that we were going to do this show, and she said, you know what? You should do, because it's the anniversary, you should do a special offer on the book. Now, this is not the shameless commerce thing. No, we're not there yet. We'll do that later. But what I'm going to do is, at Elisa's suggestion, because we're in the anniversary month, I am going to get with the suits from Lulu and Amazon and whoever else is selling this book and make them lower the price to cost. We're going down to cost.
There you go.
And then we're going to let people, take advantage during this special anniversary month. So keep your eye on the blog, guys. I'll let the details be known. But I'm going to get with that Bezos character and tell him, hey, lower the price, Jeff.
Yeah.
More about that later. In 108, 108, this is another one of our regular contributors, a guy, Bob W8SX. Bob came over and saw me in Rome, and I gave him a tour of the embassy. I really owed him because he has been our correspondent at the 4 Days in May event for many years now. This May 24, 2009 wasn't the first time he did it. I think he did it 2 years earlier, but it was one of the early ones. And every year people look forward to Bob's interviews from FDIM. And interviewing some of these guys it's not easy. Some of the there's a lot of
like pulling teeth.
There's a lot of introverted personalities in our hobby, Pete,
yeah.
And getting them to.
We're not one of them.
No, fortunately, we're outside that group, as we've been demonstrating here at least. But anyway, then we have here's a difficult, painful period. I cringe. My teeth hurt when I mentioned this. Around episode 110, people became acutely aware of the fact that I have this gap between my two front teeth that, unbeknownst to me, produces some high-frequency audio oscillations, the sibilant S problem.
Wow.
I think we may have taken care of it, but you never know. It might be out there. Fortunately, I have tinnitus and high-frequency hearing loss, so it doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you, U.S. Army.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that we had long discussions about that. Actually, it turned out to be a lot of fun. And Pete, on 123, which, speaking of the book, it was remarkable. I mean, really remarkable. I told people that I had received word from Chicago that I was going to be on the Oprah Book Club with the book SolderSmoke, Global Adventures in Wireless Electronics. Yeah, it was really surprising. I didn't think Oprah would be into these kind of books. But there it was. So I made an announcement on April 1st. I told these guys, I said, listen, you guys don't watch Oprah, but your wives do. So what you do after this podcast, you go to your wife and you say, honey, Bill Marrow's going to be on Oprah with his book SolderSmoke. Please listen and let me know when it's going to be. And, a remarkably large number of our fellow radio amateurs had this conversation with their wives. And a number of them wrote to me afterwards saying that the wives just looked at them like, what are you, nuts? They're never going to have him on Oprah. No, we didn't. And later on, I remarked we were thinking about the possibility of being on with Dr. Phil. That didn't work out either. Let me see what else. We got someone here. Keep going on. There's so many. 126. By 126, October 11, 2010, we were back in the USA. Here we are. We came back. Our European adventure had ended. In episode 129 on January 8, 2011, I make mention of a really cool modification of the SBL1 mixer that I came across in Experimental Methods in RF Design, again, by this W6JFR guy. This is all kind of foreshadowing. Things to come. 138, October 4th, 2011, I report that my Drake 2B was back on the air. The Drake 2B has been almost a fixture in this program. Sometimes it just seemed like we should change the name of the podcast to the Drake 2B cast.
There you go.
And provided a lot of grist for our mill. 141, February 5th, 2011, we discuss one of the many weird esoteric problems that we live with as homebrewing radio amateurs, Murphy's Whiskers. You remember Murphy's Whiskers? Don't you remember?
No, I don't. The solder things get all over the place and short things up?
No. It's those little bits at the end when you use RG174 coax.
Okay.
And the braid breaks off and little pieces find their way into the rig.
And short things.
Those are called Murphy's Whiskers.
Oh, okay.
And that's the reason that I have this fear of RG174 cable. But a line came in from the old country, Pete, from Italy, that I really loved. And I put it in there, and I'm going to repeat it here, and then we'll translate it. Non è radioamatore, se non li fuma il soldatore.
Yeah.
You're not a radio amateur unless you know the solder.
Yeah.
Smoke the solder.
Yeah, fume.
Non è radioamatore, se non li fuma il soldatore. Saldatore. Yeah, all right. Anyway, good stuff from Italy there. 142, March 19, 2012, another mention of the Wizard of the West Coast, Pete Giuliano's. We talk about an SSB rig. This was 2012. You were on there again. You're in this thing a lot, even before we signed this lucrative contract that brings you in here full time. 148, December 30th, 2012. First mention of Peter Parker's Beach 40. Peter, the Wizard of Melbourne. And we got that in there. Always good to have Peter. Peter's been involved in the podcast for many years. Great ideas coming out of Melbourne. In episode 150, March 6, 2013, the kludge or kludge controversy. We get into a lot of discussions of words. Steve Silverman is our official SolderSmoke lexicographer and dictionary maintainer. And there's a discussion that hasn't quite ended about whether you call it kludge or kludge.
That's like solder.
I know, but there we have it. It's the Brits who are messing us up. This is nothing but ourselves to blame. I go with kludge. How about you?
Kludge.
Oh, man, there you go. It's the West Coast. All right. Also, on that episode in 150, I announced that yet again, and this happens almost every year, I was the winner of the ARRL International DX DX contest in my category, my unique category. In this case, it was QRP, homebrew, double sideband, Northern Virginia.
Yeah, yeah.
I got the plaque right here.
Yeah,
It was a proud moment for me. March 18th, 2013, episode 152 may have been the first mention of Arduinos.
Wow.
And important. 155, October 2013, I talked about building the BitX 17. And I also talked about, it was kind of funny, when you're in this game, this homebrew games, very often you have to go to hardware stores, pharmacies, other places to buy things that cause people to say, the question I had was, why does a 55-year-old man need clear nail polish varnish?
Yeah, there you go.
Varnish. I think probably to put it on one of the coils, right? Yeah. So can you imagine? I walk into the local CVS and stand there and say, "Do you have any clear nail polish varnish?"
Yeah.
Reminded me of the time I went into the pharmacy and asked for some empty pill bottles.
Yeah. What are you doing, Bill? Yeah.
They were ready to call the Drug Enforcement Administration.
Yeah.
Start putting the cuffs on. I also announced in that episode the sad but kind of timely death of my Tech 465 scope. I fought against it. It fought a good battle. I eventually gave up and bought the Rigol. 159, April 2014, I met W1REX, Rex Harper.
Yeah, Rex.
The keeper of the Tuna Tin 2. I met him out at the Vienna Wireless Hamfest, and we conducted a Mojo transfer ceremony.
Wow.
I didn't have a Tuna Tin 2 with me, but I had my BitX 17, and so we recorded it. It's up on the blog, but he touched my BitX 17 with the...
and powered it.
The Mojo was transferred.
Wow.
Got the Mojo. Yeah. And I also talk about my own kind of project that I called Revenge of the Nerd. This is when I decided to take on the Hearing Aid 5 receiver project that I had failed in 38 years earlier.
And you found the problem.
I did, with the help of Dexter down there in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And he chimed in and told me that I'd wound the coils with the improper coil sense.
There you go.
That QST didn't have the sense to warn me about. Yeah. But anyway, all's forgiven. And then episode 161, 26 May 2014, Pete Giuliano joins the SolderSmoke team. That brings us to the modern era.
Yeah, well, that's amazing, Bill. I was just kind of following along there, and it's interesting to see the topics. So some of those keep showing back up, which is good. Michigan Mighty Might, when you said, "Geez, that was a long time ago." Yeah,
it's either good or it's an indication of insanity.
Yeah.
One or the other.
Yeah.
Good. I also, as I was doing this, Pete, I realized that along the lines of what you just said, that there are certain, not only projects, but certain phrases that have become sort of part of the SolderSmoke lexicon. And I've always been a little bit wary. We're in danger of spinning into cult status here. That's why I was reluctant to get into tweeting. That's why we don't do podcasts every single week. If you start doing this, then the next thing you know, you're a cult.
Yeah.
And you're asking people to drink Kool-Aid and, all that kind of stuff. So we don't want to go there.
Right.
So we kind of keep a limit on it. There's a lot of good stuff, a lot of good stuff that people should be looking at, so we kind of limit it. But inevitably, when you have this many programs over this period of time, there starts to develop kind of a vocabulary that's kind of unique or special or kind of, the lexicon of SolderSmoke. So I thought I would just throw out a few terms here. And some of them have come up during your time with us. Some of them go back further. Some of them you've brought to us. But, for example, the first one that comes to mind is basta. Basta. That's enough. That's what you scream when you've had enough. Kludge or kludge, we've just mentioned. We've also mentioned the Knack, Dilbert's disease. Some people don't like all this discussion of the Knack. I've had some negative comments on the Knack, but I think it really captures. You got to go back and take a look at that original animated cartoon that Scott Adams did, where it shows Dilbert's mom taking him to the doctor. I mean, I think that's really important. We use the term exorcism sometimes. We use it recently. That's when you've got to get the ghost out of the machine. That's another phrase, the ghost in the machine. That's yours. You brought that to us. That's when you have some problem and you realize that there's an oscillation in there that's not supposed to be in there. That's the ghost in the machine.
Yeah.
We used that just this last week.
Yeah.
And if you have that, you have to conduct an exorcism.
Yeah.
This is related also. That's the bad part. That's the ghost of the machine. We also have the soul in the machine.
Oh, yeah.
This is from Tracy Kidder from his book, Soul in the New Machine. Classic about the development of computers up there in the Boston corridor up there. And was it 128 up there in Boston? And how they built that first computer. Wonderful book. But we use it just to mean, make a rig in which you have put your own input into it, or parts from an old friend, or circuits from Sprat, or coils that your kid helped you wind, or a cabinet that your daughter painted, or something like that. Put soul into that machine. Soul in the new machine. Luddite curmudgeonism. Doesn't come up too often.
Oh, yeah.
I am the main victim of this.
Yes.
So this is the Luddite curmudgeonism came up several times when I was resisting the use of GPS, Arduinos, PLLs, all those nasty little mystery black boxes that you have brought into our lives, Pete Giuliano. Luddite curmudgeonism. The speed of dark.
Ooh.
This is when Billy was little. Some of this stuff comes from when the kids were small. But Billy, one time we were talking about the speed of light, and he looked at me one day and said, "Dad, what is the speed of dark?"
Ooh, interesting question. Yeah.
Yes. Under that, man. Wow. Excelsior.
There you go.
That's Gene Shepard. That's Gene Shepard's phrase. Gene Shepard's played a big role in the podcast, and so that was his catchphrase. And we've got frequent references to Gene and links to his many videos that are now out on YouTube. Ones that I talk about sometimes, we just use this. It is part of the lexicon. Tales of woe.
Oh yeah.
That's what we bring to the podcast just about every month.
Yeah.
Tales of woe. Because home brewing is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
It's not easy. This is not plug and play.
Yeah.
If you play in this game, you're going to have some tales of woe. And I've always really kind of been curious about why our listeners take such delight in my tales of woe.
Mine too.
Some of them are still chuckling about the time that I soldered in the chip in the frequency counter upside down, and on both sides of the board.
Well, Bill, there's an answer to that. The people who do that, who delight in that, they do that all the time. And now that you do it, who is well known, and you mentioned it, they say, "Okay, I'm not the only
did it. I did
it."
Yeah. All right. Tribal knowledge.
Ooh, there you go.
There you go. That's yours. You brought us that. That's how our whole collaboration started. We were going to do some specials on tribal knowledge.
Yeah.
And there's just so much of it. We're just keeping on going. So we thank you for bringing us all the tribal knowledge. Related to Tales of Woe, the opposite of Tales of Woe is something that I call the Joy of Oscillation.
Yep.
This is a family show, so there's really no double entendre here. We're not making allusions to anything else. But it is. The first time you build that Michigan Mighty Mite and you hear it going boop in the receiver, that's the Joy of Oscillations. It's now been, there's an acronym, J-O-O,
yeah.
J-O, small o, J-O-O,
yeah.
Joy of Oscillation. Socketry. I love socketry.
Ooh.
That's George Dobbs.
Yes.
He was talking one time about how you build the rig, you build the receiver, you build the transmitter, and then what's left is the cabinetry and the socketry.
Yep.
Good stuff, George. The kids, again, Maria ends almost every podcast when we get into that kind of who we are, where we are, how you can contribute and all that. And then she closes with, "Ciao, bravi ragazzi." Yeah, it's which translates basically, later, all you inventive boys.
Yeah.
Smart fellows.
Good guys.
And then Billy's phrase is in there, too, and that's right before the gong. And that's where he says in his 6-year-old voice that he's very embarrassed about now, "Ooh, that's awesome." That's Billy. I've been given a title, and I forget the call sign of the guy who gave it to me. He's going to be mad, but he hasn't been in touch with us for a long time. But you know that at one time I was named the Grand Poobah?
The Grand Poobah. Wow.
GPB.
Ooh.
That's it. I'm very proud of that title, the Grand Poobah. But I think the part of the lexicon that I like the best, that really captures the essence of the whole thing, Pete, is the IBEW.
Yes.
Now, American listeners know about this because the IBEW is a trade union familiar to us for many years, the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers.
Yes.
Electrical workers.
Yep.
Yeah. The Electricians Union in the United States.
Yeah.
Very important, very powerful. We changed it around a little bit, and we call it the International Brotherhood of Electronic Wizards.
Yes.
The IBEW. Now, Brotherhood's too restrictive because there are women in this game, and they're making important contributions, so they're included also. But the IBEW, the International Brotherhood, because that's one thing that we find is that when we talk to people, no matter what corner of the world they're from, when we ask them about their initial experiences with radio or what they're struggling with, it's all the same. You'll find out there was this guy in Sudan who, when he was 8 years old, wanted to take apart radios and didn't know why. Or some guy whose grandfather showed him how to change the broadcast radio in the living room so that it would receive 160 meters, and he started listening. All these stories. And the thing is, it is something that we really have in common, no matter where in the world it comes from. On the cover of the SolderSmoke book, I don't know if anybody's noticed it, but there's a diagram for a simple crystal radio. If you take a look, the lettering, the parts designations are in Arabic.
Wow.
And when I saw that, I just said, there you go. There's the International Brotherhood of Electronic Wizards.
Yeah.
There's some kids over there in the Arabic-speaking world struggling with the same kind of stuff that you and I struggled with here in the United States, that our friends in Europe struggle with. It's the International Brotherhood of Electronic Wizards.
Absolutely.
That completes our walk down memory lane. Unless you have anything you want to add.
Well, it's kind of interesting, those catchphrases. I notice that a lot of emails that come through, people will talk about the joy of oscillation. I mean, these get repeated. He said, I've had the joy of oscillation.
They're becoming part of the culture.
Yes, they're becoming part of the culture.
They're going to start showing up in People magazine.
Yeah. There you go.
Oh, on Oprah.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, well, listen. Enough looking back, time to look forward. What is on the bench at the Newbury Park Laboratories of N6QW?
Well, my time these days is being consumed with the antenna project.
Yeah.
And so...
Well, it's the time of year.
Yeah,
it's a good time of year
it's better than February 16th.
That's right.
Anyway...
When we normally do it.
Anyway, I have been discovering some really interesting things. First off, you think you can build an antenna for $200? That's not the case. This is like a giant sinkhole in my backyard.
Oh my
You keep adding this and say I better do that, but I've tried to document what I'm doing on a blog, so you can see some photographs and things of that sort. And some things have actually worked out pretty good. Yesterday, Bill, I moved my current antenna to a new location, so I wouldn't be off the air during the construction of the support mast for the two-element beam that will soon be arriving. And it was kind of interesting because where I put it, I looked at it and I said, why didn't you put it there in the first place? After I went through this elaborate, preparation and to put it in place, and yet there was something staring me right in the face. Would have been a lot easier to do. And I said, geez, why didn't you think of that before? Someone had put a couple of anchor bolts in the chimney, and I guess they had a trellis there or something like that, and it turns out those anchor bolts work really great for putting up a bracket so I can hold the mast.
The bearing.
Yeah. So I was saying, geez, where were you 2 years ago?
With the radio gods.
Yeah.
They want you to put that antenna there.
Yeah, and then I discovered something else. When I tried to push up the mast, it's a fiberglass mast. And this is good information when I do the aluminum mast because it's a similar type of operation. Dust and debris had collected on this fiberglass mast. So when I let it down, it was pretty easy because the weight just forced it down. When I tried to pull it back up, you had all this friction from all this dust and debris. I mean, I killed myself yesterday. I said, it wasn't this hard before. So it was a good lesson for me in the preparation of putting up the mast when I do the aluminum mast for the beam. So learn lots of things. But
I really like the way you're describing it on the blog, and this is a time to put in a plug for Pete's blog. Check it out at n6qw.com?
No, it's n6qw.blogspot.com.
There you go, n6qw.blogspot.com. I'm really enjoying it. One thing I didn't realize is you have beautiful mountains around your house.
Yeah.
That looks really cool.
Yeah,
I mean, it's really nice.
Yeah.
And I like the diagram that you did that shows how you're going to have the base, how you got the rebar going into the concrete. You got the rotor right down there at the bottom.
Yeah.
You push the whole thing up and you rotate it from the bottom, and you don't have this rotor floating around up there on the top of the thing. You got the two sets of guy wires with the magic rope.
Yeah, the magic rope.
It's got to be. Imagine that magic costs a lot more money.
Yeah, that's right. You got it.
That's what makes it magic.
I said, geez, how could this cost so much? And the guy says,
magical for
magic.
It's like those audiophile cables that have had the oxygen removed.
Yeah. Jeez.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's great. And so when are you going to be spinning that thing out and and stirring up the ionosphere?
Well, the beam is a custom manufacture, and it takes almost a month. So we're a couple of weeks away yet from the beam arriving. But that's good because now, since I moved the current antenna, I'm going to ready to put the base in next week. So so once that goes together, and also I found a good way to do this with taking some parts from a U.S. Towers rotor base plate. And there's some pictures on the blog how I added some brackets that you can buy at Home Depot with some anchor bolts. And that's going to keep that off the base by about 3 inches because you can put the control cable on the bottom of the rotator. So there's some pictures of that on the blog that you can see how that's all going to go together. So I'm finding different parts and pieces all over, and that's why I think in some respects, rushing in, try to do this in 2 days, haste makes waste.
Haste makes waste, yeah. Make haste slowly. Well, I mean, it's good. It's a good summertime project for you. Keeps you out of trouble.
Oh yeah.
Prevents you from putting that beret on, going out down and hanging out at Starbucks and getting in trouble. No, man. Keep on the straight and narrow there. That's good. How do you like the blog experience now that you're a blogger?
Well, I got to tell you, I thought it was pretty hard.
Initially, get it going?
No. Just before doing it, I thought, geez, this is going to be hard. And then you put me onto that software, and it's not that hard. I mean,
no, it's not hard. No.
They've got all these templates, and I mean, you can do some really interesting things. I mean, one I didn't realize you could have the floating. You have it on the SolderSmoke blog, the floating pictures.
Oh,
yeah. I
thought,
geez, that's going to be hard. No, it's not.
No. You could even do it so that they'll pull down pictures from the web for you. If you give it a subject, a title, you could put it in there, and they'll just randomly select from the web.
Wow.
Now it's dangerous because you sometimes get some images that you didn't really.
You didn't really.
Like, so use a word like oscillator.
Yeah.
You could get some images that you might not have been expecting.
Yeah.
So, upset about that.
Here was the thing that's the eye opener is the statistics. Okay. You see the statistics. And I learned something. First of, there have only been 1,600 people in less than a month that have looked at the blog, but it's from 42 countries, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I learned that there's a country that I never knew existed.
What's that?
Jersey, in the Channel Islands.
Yeah, it's Jersey Island, Jersey.
It's a separate country. So
it's right over there by France.
Yeah, so I said,
it's pretty cool.
And it was the only island sort of related to the British Empire that was occupied by the Germans during World War II. So I said, I said, Jersey, where's that at? And I went and looked up the information on Jersey. So
it's the Jersey Shore, Pete. It's right over there.
Well,
those people.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's many Italians in Jersey as there are in New Jersey. I get the picture. But anyway, it's very informative. You learn more things than you thought you were going to learn as a result of that. So that's kind of interesting.
Well, you got a lot to put on there, so we'll encourage our listeners to go and check that out. And other people that we know have got blogs going, and they need to update them. They need to share the tribal knowledge.
Yeah.
I'm talking to you, Farhan.
Yeah.
He's got the blog up there, but got to update it. The thing is, Farhan's a very busy guy. He's got all kinds of irons in the fire, all kinds of different projects. And but he's got a blog up too, and I hope he starts updating.
You know what's really good about that? People look at that blog, and they provide you information that you would wonder, where am I going to find information on this? For instance, I was playing around with one of the displays, and I wanted to display a sine wave because I'm looking to embed some.
I saw that. It's pretty cool this morning.
Arduino in some test equipment, and I was having trouble displaying a sine wave.
You got to do the radians.
Yeah. So someone come back and says, "Hey, Pete, radians." You remember
there you go. No,
high school trigonometry, radians, and I put the radians in there, and guess what? It works.
We'll talk more about the contributors when we talk a little bit later about phase noise. But I wanted to give a shout out to somebody who has once again saved me from a tale of a tale of woe. She helped me once again with an exorcism. We got the ghosts out of the machine, Pete.
Yep.
Let me tell everybody what's been going on. This is the CCI amp, the Communications Concepts Incorporated EB63A. EB refers to electronic bulletin. These are amplifiers that are now sold by this company, CCI, a great company. And the EB63 is one of the really basic amps. I think it's their cheapest HF amp. It produces about 120 watts out with a few watts in. It's got 2 Motorola transistors. It's got no real feedback networks. It's just straight through. It's really simple. Run it off 13 volts. And it works great, but you have to really kind of, when you buy one of these things, you have to realize that the simplicity of the design sometimes imposes some limitations and sometimes problems can arise. And I had a problem that I noticed. It's probably been there for a couple of years, for a year now, since I've had the amplifier. But I didn't really notice it until I looked closely at the output on 17 meters. And what was happening was this. I watched the output of the amplifier with my Rigol scope. And I just take a little audio signal generator and I put it in the mic connector of the BitX17 transmitter. And then I crank up the audio and I watch the output, which should be on one frequency, right, one tone, coming out of the BitX and the amplifier. And as I increased the audio input, I would notice from the BitX a very smooth increase in RF output on that one frequency, that one tone, until you reach the point where, okay, that's the max, and you don't want to overdrive it, so there you go. So it was doing what it was supposed to do. The BitX was producing about 5 watts of clean RF out. When I did the same thing through the CCI amp, it was almost perfect, but not perfect. Because what would happen, about halfway through, as I increased the power, at low inputs of audio, it was a nice clean sine wave coming out, but I would reach a point about halfway up where, man, that thing, the output would just go crazy for a second. And then if I increased the power a little bit more and I went up into the kind of the higher end of the drive range for the amplifier, it would once again be perfect. But I noticed that every time the drive levels went up through that kind of mid-range, it would look, the whole waveform would go crazy. Now, it took me a while, and we went back and forth trying to figure out whether the problem was in my BitX17 or whether it was in the amplifier. And through a series of tests, I really came to conclude that it was something in the amplifier because there was I never saw any evidence of it coming out of the BitX17. So the ghost was in the machine, but I was almost certain that it was in the CCI machine. And then we started looking for solutions. And whenever I get into a problem like this, I turn to 2 people. I turn to you and to Allison KB1GMX. And, man, Allison has saved me so many times. She's got such a wealth of knowledge on especially these kinds of amplifier problems. But, I mean, she's got on a broad range of electronic topics. And she knew all about this amp. She has run a similar version herself. And she started sending me kind of suggestions for troubleshooting. And then finally, right before we went away on vacation, she sent me kind of a prescription. I said, this is the prescription from Dr. Allison.
Yeah.
And it was really cool. Simple, elegant, easy to do. And what she said is, this amplifier could use some negative feedback. Because for some reason, as you go up, the gain and the bandwidth of solid-state amplifiers, especially if they don't have any feedback in there, can vary with drive levels. So there was probably some point as I increased the drive where the gain and the bandwidth of the amplifier was such that it would spring into oscillation briefly at that particular drive level. With the Rigol scope, I was able to narrow it down, and I knew that it was oscillating at about 435 kilohertz. All right, so we needed to do, what do you do about this? Okay, you know that it's oscillating at 435 kilohertz, but what do you do? So Allison prescribed a small amount of negative feedback. The circuit that she told me to put in was very simple. It was an FT50-43 ferrite toroid with 10 turns of wire on it. One end of the 10 turns of the wires goes to the collector of one transistor, one end goes to the collector of the other transistor. Through this is the cool part, through the center of the toroid, you put a 4.7 ohm 2-watt resistor. And you connect one end of the resistor to the base of one transistor and one end of the transistor to the base of the other transistor. This forms, in essence, a 10-to-1 turns ratio transformer. And then if you have the wires collected properly, it'll be negative feedback. If you have them crossed, you'll turn this into a 120-watt oscillator.
Yeah.
Luckily, I got it right the first time. I figured my odds were 50-50.
Yeah.
So I put this thing in, and it was like, man, it was like magic. It was like, well, it wasn't magic. It was like a successful prescription from the doctor, Dr. Allison. And I went and did the test that had been bedeviling me, the tail of woe test. And as I increased the gain, right at that point where I thought it was going to break into oscillation, it didn't. Smooth as silk. Fixed. Done. Thank you, Allison. And, I mean, as we always say, it's when you get into a problem like this, you need patience. You can't just figure you're going to fix it in a day. This probably took me 3-4 weeks to get this thing squared away. You need to reach out to people who can help you with this thing, who are willing to be Elmers. And Allison was great, and Pete, you too, we can just get all kinds of encouragement. Hang in there. I know you installed a similar circuit in one of your amplifiers.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, but Allison, well, wow, thanks a lot, and she is a real resource for all of us. She's active on many of the lists and always provides really great input. So I want to thank her. She's terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. And she made a really important point. There's a lot of commercial equipment out there that does not have this feedback.
Yeah.
And actually, the where I installed it was in one of the RF bricks that came out of an Atlas 210X, and she said a lot of those amps got smoked. You wonder how this stuff gets out in the marketplace, and it doesn't have those fixes. And I guess this fix that you recommended, it actually appears in quite a few commercial products that have addressed this issue. And she went through a list there of
and it's in some of the subsequent CCI amps, some of the more advanced products, they have this kind of feedback in there. But and then just to understand the theory, it's kind of beautiful when you think about what's going on, because to understand how the feedback prevents the oscillation, I mean, it comes down to this: you have the oscillation because there somehow RF at this frequency is finding a path from output to input at the proper phase, so that it becomes positive feedback and the thing takes off. It's probably a very small amount of energy, right? But it's just enough energy to cause this thing to go into oscillation.
It's like a regenerative receiver. I think that's what she used the analogy.
Right. Now, if you deliberately go in there and put feedback, negative feedback, a certain amount, but a significant amount, okay, you're going to reduce the gain of the amplifier a bit, but you're in essence going to be throwing kind of like a big blanket on that positive feedback, because if that positive feedback was just enough to kick it into oscillation before,
K beta equals 1.
Now it's buried under all that negative feedback, so it's counteracting it and it's keeping everything stable. So 3 cheers for Allison and for negative feedback.
Yeah.
Negative feedback is usually a negative thing, but in this case,
it's positive.
We might have to add that to the lexicon for the next year.
But it's positive.
Talking about burning out things, I've been burning out scope probes on the Rigol because they're getting close. When I put it on the output of the amplifier, I'm getting close to the 200 volts peak to peak. But they're cheap, so I'm going to order a bunch of them and hopefully not have to do this too much anymore. The only other thing I've been doing on the bench is I put it on the blog. This was kind of cool. I got a readout for the BitX20. I've been using the BitX20 more than BitX17 because of band conditions, which have been stinko.
Yeah.
But 2020's been better, and I bought this little from Sanjian, that company in China, a 6-digit readout. I found that I didn't need the 8-digit. I got the 6-digit, and I needed a box for it. Fits perfectly in an Altoids tin.
Yeah, it looks so cool.
It looks cool. I even asked people, I said, should I cover up the markings on the Altoids? And somebody came and said, you would not be true to homebrew spirit if you did that. You'd be trying to cover up your homebrewedness. So that the tape came off, and my frequency display now says along the top, the original celebrated, and then down below it says peppermint, 100% natural.
Yeah. You know, our friend Dwayne, KV4QB, I think is his call, he made an interesting observation. He said, if they hadn't invented Altoids, we wouldn't have electronic projects.
There's element of truth there.
Yeah.
Thank God for Altoids.
Yeah.
And it adds a certain nice, I like it because it adds a nice British element to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Pete, now I'm going to ask you to behave yourself.
I am.
Control yourself. Keep that Italian.
I took my blood pressure medicine. Yeah, I did.
It's time for us to talk about one of your least favorite subjects, or most emotional subjects.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to turn to the vexing issue of phase noise. Dun, 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 dun. All right, phase noise. Here, let me give you a little bit of background here. Pete has been the champion of the use of a part called the SI5351 chip. It's a wonderful little chip. You use it with an Arduino. The chip itself is smaller than your thumbnail. The board itself that comes with it is kind of the size of the last digit on your thumb there. And it produces we only use 2, but it produces 3 different frequencies. The great thing about this is that you could use one frequency as the variable frequency oscillator in a single sideband transceiver, and you could use the other as the BFO. So one chip gives you the BFO and the VFO. You don't have to build these oscillators, and it makes these rigs extremely frequency agile. So, for example, if I wanted to change my BitX40 Digitia to a different band, I would just reload the software, have the VFO operating at a different frequency, and I could even reset the BFO to go from upper sideband to lower sideband. Presto. It's really cool. Now, when this thing first came out, very quickly, there were people bad-mouthing it, trash-talking it, talking smack, as the kids say, I think. Anyway, they were saying that they had looked at the statistics on it and found that the phase noise, unacceptable, horrible, noisy, scratchy, dirty, all those phrases. They were talking bad about your chip.
Oh, yeah.
And you didn't like it.
Nope. I'm constraining myself, Bill.
All right, good. You are, and so I'll just roll with it here a little bit. When I first heard about this, I'm thinking phase noise. I never even heard of phase noise. What are they talking about? And so I had to dig into it, and which is good. I learned a lot. I went to EMRFD, the Experimental Methods in RF Design. I also went to the ARRL 2002 handbook. There were good sections on phase noise in there. And I began to understand what some of these folks were saying. Really what was happening is I think some people started raising questions about the phase noise figures for this chip, especially as it compared to the phase noise from a more frequently used chip, the SI570, right?
Right.
And they found that the figures cited for the SI5351 were worse than for the SI570. And so I think some people concluded that, we shouldn't use the SI5351 because it has worse phase noise or more phase noise. But it didn't match with our experience because you started using them in rigs without any trouble. Let's talk a little bit about what phase noise means. It's a fancy term, but really the most important word there is noise. If you have an oscillator, and the oscillator is supposed to produce signals on one frequency, it's supposed to produce a sine wave on one frequency. Now, if it's also producing noise off to the sides, then it's noisy. And I have had them where they were producing multiple frequencies all up and down. They were squeeging, they were squirrely, they were dirty. Those were really, really bad. But normally you build an oscillator, and it is on the one frequency, and you don't even really notice if there's noise off to the side. But people do measure this stuff, especially with these chips, and they were doing measurements on these chips, and the word got out that the SI5351 had more noise than the SI570. And then I think people just started repeating it, and without actually kind of digging in, and they were, oh, you can't use that chip, it's too noisy. Oh, no, we can't use the SI5351, it's too noisy. We've got to stick with the SI570. Oh, the phase noise is unacceptable. And it was kind of a snowball effect. People kept talking about it and talking about it and talking about it until and what drove me to action on this is that I was listening to another podcast, a podcast that I like a lot, that I admire a lot. These great guys make good contributions. But they were talking about the SI5351, and they were talking about the phase noise, and then in the conversation they started talking about how phase noise had created problems years ago for megawatt shortwave broadcast stations because their oscillators were dirty and they were wiping out the entire HF spectrum around their frequencies. And holy cow, if you listen to this, you'd think that this SI5351 is a beast, an electronic beast that should be strangled in its crib. It should be wiped out. It should be removed from parts catalogs all around the world because it's such a danger to the HF frequency spectrum. And that's not true. It's just not it. So we started looking more closely. How am I doing, Pete? Am I being reasonable?
Perfect.
And you're exhibiting remarkable self-restraint.
Oh, yes. I had a big drink. I had a big drink before we started.
Even though it's 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
All right. But anyway, so we started looking at this, and one of the things I did, I said, wait a second, how much noise is there in... I got 3 BitXs here. One of them uses a VXO, a crystal-controlled oscillator. One of them uses a VFO, sort of the classic BitX VFO, and the third one uses the SI5351. I have my new Rigol scope, and it has this cool fast Fourier transform feature in it. It also lets you take screenshots, which I think is pretty cool. Now, I know the FFT is not a real spectrum analyzer. I know there's shortcomings. I know it's not really a precise piece of gear. But I just said to myself, okay, if there's such a vast difference between the crystal oscillator of VFO and the SI5351, you should be able to see some of it if you put the scope on the output of all 3 oscillators, especially since the rigs are so remarkably similar. All these oscillators feed into diode ring mixers. I didn't want to tear these rigs apart, so I did a real simple thing. I just went and I put the scope probe on 1, 2, and 3, and then I took pictures of all 3, and I posted them up on the SolderSmoke blog. And the thing that really strikes you about the 3 pictures is how remarkably similar they are. You see a big peak right there at the desired frequency, and then you see trailing off to the sides way, 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 way down there. It trails off, right? There's no noise. It's not like you see one where it's horribly noisy and there's all these spikes at other frequencies. No, they're not there. They look the same. If you did like a kind of a blind test and you didn't tell people which were which, you couldn't tell the difference between the crystal oscillator and the SI5351. And this matches our experience in building rigs with this part, right?
Right.
When I listen to the receiver using the SI5351, it sounds as good or better than the receivers that I built using with the same circuitry using crystal oscillators or a VFO. It sounds the same. One of the tests that they recommend, because they say that in the handbook and I think at EMRFD, they point out that phase noise is really remarkably difficult to measure. You need a lot of test gear. You use test gear up to like $100,000 worth of test gear. I don't have it. I got the Rigol scope, costs $300. But one of the things that they said you could do is to find out if you've got bad noise is just tune in on a strong signal. Maybe set up a carrier oscillator in the shack and then kind of sneak up on it with the receiver and see if you start to hear noise off to the side. I did it with the SI5351. No noise. On transmit, are we going to hear people complaining that the signal is broad and noisy? You and I have been out there on 40 meters, Pete, where they're very, very, very picky. They all have pan adapters. They all have flex radios. They look very carefully. No one has told me that this thing is broad. I think it's much ado about nothing. Say something.
I'm sitting here nodding my head. Yeah, sitting here nodding my head. Yes.
Yeah. One of the other things, one other point I make is that, this was a good point that was made in the handbook, and I think in the MRFD also. Phase noise is not something new. It's not something unique to chips like the SI5351. All oscillators produce phase noise. Even that beautiful little crystal oscillator, the Michigan Mighty Mite, makes phase noise. As a matter of fact, in EMRFD, they provide a circuit that deliberately, they say, this is the kind of oscillator, crystal oscillator, I think, or it might be an LC oscillator, but this is the kind of, I think it's a crystal oscillator, that will produce a lot of phase noise. So that even when they're discussing crystal oscillators, they're saying, some of them will produce phase noise, some of them will produce more or less. But I think the most important thing is how far down it is. We're talking 100 dB down from the carrier signal. 100 dB. You know what 100 dB is?
Yeah.
Hell.
Well, if it's 10 dB, it's 10 times. So if it's 100 dB, guess what? Big number. You're not going to hear it. You're not going to see it. By the way, interestingly enough, Bill, in the solid-state design for the radio amateur, there's that famous oscillator in there. It's low noise.
Yeah. Yep. Good one. Yeah. Well, I'm looking at EMRFD here, and there's some lines here that really jump off the page. Page 4.12. The author's right. At first glance, phase noise sounds like an esoteric detail that probably has little impact on practical communications. This is generally true, close quotes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the oscillator circuit that they provide. It says, the circuit of figure 4.21 is especially bad for phase noise, and it's a crystal oscillator.
Yep.
Right? So this can be built as a simple experiment that will allow you to hear the results in a station receiver. It also points out that, you have to realize that one of the things they say on receive, we talked about a test to determine whether you've got a problem there, but they also point out that on transmit, the noise that comes out at the end of the power amplification, the noise will have the same relationship to the final signal as the phase noise has to the oscillator signal. In other words, if it's 100 dB down at the oscillator, whatever noise comes out is 100 dB
down.
Yeah. Oh, man. Come on. Here, the other thing comes up is the comparison with the SI570. And I think a lot of people they saw, I put it here, I said, maybe one of the stats showed that the noise was at 156 dB down, maybe say for the SI570. And then the SI5351 might have been at 150 dB down. And then somebody says, holy cow, it's got 6 dB more noise.
Relative.
Well, that'd be a lot if you were talking about an antenna and you say you got 6 dB gain, right? But we're talking microwatts. It's tiny. You're not even going to notice the difference. Some guys have come out and done some good tests, and we got some good observations from Thomas, LA3PNA, and then he relayed to me also some stats, some accurate measurements that were done for Jason NT7S. And then just this morning, we got another set of tests came in from a fellow with some good equipment, K0WFS, and he points out, and I think he found a phase noise figure for the SI5351 at negative 96 dBc per hertz. that's still, it's 100 dB down. And he says that even that is not bad, right? And he says that if you were really paranoid and you wanted to knock it down, all you would need to do is put a low-pass filter after the oscillator, because much of the noise is just harmonics. And if you could knock down the higher frequency harmonics, the noise coming out of the oscillator is reduced even further. So this is not a showstopper for the SI5351, and I just hope that people will take with a very large grain of salt any claims that the SI5351 might be less than useful for radio amateurs. How is that for diplomatic handling? What do you think?
Your training is showing forth.
I am a silver-tongued devil, my friend.
Yes, I know. You know, there's two things that struck me here, Bill. First, I think it's important to note these people are making pronouncements, and I don't think they've actually had one operating in a radio in front of them. I mean, I think if you had something operating in a radio in front of you, you might say, well, I sure can't tell the difference. And I think the other issue is it's just easy to parrot. You know, oh, yeah, I heard the phase noise is bad. I go back to SolderSmoke 169, and I was where the subject first came up. And I was talking about the article in the LBS, and the editor said to me, hey, did you see MFRFD, the phase noise bad. What are you doing putting that in the radio? I said, get a grip. I got one working on the bench here. So, I mean, it's real easy to just take somebody's word and say, well, yeah, it's worse. You know, and you so aptly pointed out the IRF 510 and the NE 602. You know, people just said, whoa, these things are terrible. You shouldn't put them in radios. Take a look in your shack.
They're all over the place.
They're all over the place, right. Exactly.
And, so, I mean, if we were building some really super-duper, liquid nitrogen-cooled receiver to get the signal from the NASA probe, deep space, you worry about it. But this is ham radio. Yeah. And as you said, you can't really even notice the differences. People should just take a listen to the receiver, the Dean AC9JQ built.
Yeah.
I mean, we just recently put the YouTube videos up on the SolderSmoke blog.
That's impressive.
It's the thing that got me was when he first came on, he was playing audio from the receiver. I thought it was him talking. There's no noise. And then he tunes around. You could barely hear the background static. And I think he was on 40 meters.
Yeah, it was.
And so, I mean, it's really quiet. It's not a problem. But for me, look, here's the other thing. For years, we've been building rigs, and we've been building homebrew oscillators. And the homebrew oscillators we build, I can never remember saying, okay, I'm going to build this rig, but I'm going to check the phase noise on the crystal oscillator before I build it. We wouldn't do that. We would, you wouldn't sit there and say, oh, I'm not going to build that rig because the phase noise out of the crystal oscillator might be too much. We never even checked. We didn't even know what it was. We just built it, and if it worked, that was great. Right. But somehow, if we're using the SI5351, unless we've got, ironclad stats on whether the phase noise is at 156 or 150, nobody wants to use it. Come on, it's crazy. It's really nuts.
Well, I think as more data becomes available, it's going to be harder to just say the phase noise is bad. And I think that recent data you got today was really eye-opener. I mean, it's a test, and it was on 20 meters. It was not some test that you're doing in the audio range. 20-meter real data, and I rest my case.
All right, we're gonna put a link up to that on the blog, so people should take a look. Give the SI5351 a chance. Be a little bit kind of skeptical about claims that it's a really noisy part, because that hasn't been our experience. And even when you look at more recent tests, the tests kind of support the use of this part in rigs. And it's a shame, because if people get the idea that you shouldn't use it, they're missing out, because you can really make some very cool rigs with it.
My final word is, okay, you go away. I'm going to use it, and I'm having lots of fun, and it works really well for me.
All right. Anyway, we got through that pretty good. We didn't use any bad words or
I restrained myself.
You were very good, Gio. All right, I think it's time for us to get into the shameless
Commerce Division. Yes, SCD.
Commerce Division. SCD. We want to thank everybody who's been using the SolderSmoke link to Amazon.com. When you think Amazon, think SolderSmoke. Now, Amazon's been getting a lot of heat in the press lately. There's been some articles coming out about it might not be the nicest place in the world to work and all that. So here's the thing. If you're mad at Amazon, you should use our site. That way, we get money from Amazon. Ha, ha, ha.
Yeah.
We get money, right?
Yeah.
If you like Amazon, you should use our site because they're getting more business. Either way, it's a win. Whether you like them or don't like them, you should still use the site. So when you think Amazon, think SolderSmoke. All you have to do is go to the blog, soldersmoke.blogspot.com, and whatever you're searching for, be it a lawnmower or an SI 5351 or whatever.
New set of tires.
New set of tires, new probes for your Rigel scope, whatever it is, just do the search there, and then the regular old screen will pop up, but cha-ching, that Bezos guy, love him or hate him, he's going to send us some money. So it's an easy way for you to support the podcast. We do use it for buying some of the stuff that we get here. We have to buy a lot of stuff because we release a lot of smoke in this shack. You know, Pete?
Yeah.
Once you release the magic smoke, man, it's hard to get it back.
Smoke parts.
So another box from Amazon is going to be out. So anyway, that's one of the best ways that you can support the podcast. I'm like I said, keep an eye out for the dramatic and drastic, temporary reduction of prices on the SolderSmoke book that we're going to.
Can't beat that offer.
No, you can't meet that off. That concludes this week's Shameless Commerce. But this reminds me, as long as we're talking about products, KX3.
Yeah.
Anything?
Well, it's interesting you should mention that because I want to get that antenna in place so I can really enjoy using the KX3. But I got to tell you, it really works well on today's band conditions. I mean, all that digital signal processing and the bandwidth and all that stuff.
Did you check the phase noise on all those oscillators?
Yeah. This is when a radio like that really shines. I mean, when you have poor band conditions, you can really dig those signals out because it's got such a superlative receiver. So, I just sit here in awe, but at the same time, it makes me feel bad because I could never build anything like that.
It's so cool. As we learned from the interviews with Wayne Burdick and Eric Schwartz, these are truly amateur radio produced rigs. This was like Wayne's dream rig as a teenage ham.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff.
So I'll give you a little more detailed report once I get the beam up because I want to put that on 20 meters. I want to. That
on 20.
Yeah.
Oh man, you're gonna be a tall ship. You're gonna be king of the band, bandmaster.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, this mentioning of Wayne, this brings us to interviews on one of the other podcasts that we like is QSO Today, run by our friend Eric 4Z1UG. I was interviewed by him on July. I think the interview was on July 21st. I think it went out shortly after that. But I had a great time. Eric does these podcasts where he interviews radio amateurs and asks them to talk about their experiences with the hobby, how they got started, what they're working on, what they like, what their thoughts about the future of the hobby are. And I had a real good time talking to Eric. So my interview's up there, and I understand that a very prominent, well-known, and highly esteemed radio amateur is going to be interviewed tomorrow.
Yes, you're right. Me.
You, fantastic. Oh, man. And I think this is going to be great.
I got to tell you, I was looking on he's got like a blog page, and he showed all these people he's interviewed. I don't know how I got on the list. I mean, I know how you got on the list.
I mean, I really know how you got on the list.
I mean, there's some really heavy hitters that he's interviewed. I mean, guys from QST and of course Wayne and people very prominent. And I'm saying, God, what's he want to talk to me for?
I was really blown away by his interview with Wayne. It was really great.
He asked some very probing questions. In preparation, he said, I'm going to ask you these questions like, who got you started in this? And I really had to think a lot about that. You know, who, if I was really to finger one person, who really got me started, and of course it was my dad.
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
Yeah.
You don't want to. You don't want. You know, you're going to do this tomorrow.
Okay,
So
I'm not going to say anymore. But I mean, they're very probing questions that he asked you. So I think it's.
Hey, Pete, I talked to him about interviewing you, and I told him, because when we first, it didn't come up specifically, but what happened was when Eric and I were doing the interview, it was on Skype, and so we finally connected by Skype, and I told him, I said, okay, I'm going to turn on the camera, and he said, oh no, don't turn on the camera, because you know the bandwidth is a bandwidth problem, and we don't want to do it that way. And I was taken aback, and I said, I always have the camera on when I'm talking to Pete, and then I thought for a second, I said, because I have to have it, because I have to see his hands moving, or else I can't understand what he's saying. So,
there you go.
So he might make an exception for you. He might put the camera.
and there are no obscene Italian gestures involved. just hand talking.
Pete and I are making obscene Italian gestures.
Yeah.
All right, but anyway, all right, so that'll be really good. We're looking forward to see that. We mentioned the horrible band conditions. Stinko, hit by a coronal mass ejection last week. Whew. People all over the world thought their rigs were broken. One thing I wanted to mention, I took the telescope out. I mentioned my telescope maintenance project. I fixed up my Dobsonian telescope, took it out, looked at Saturn. Good for the soul. My wife says I'm always in a better mood if I've done. I'm usually in a very good mood, you know, but even better than normal.
Yeah.
If I've gone out there and looked at with the telescope. Saturn is in good position right now. Saw the rings, very cool, even from the light polluted skies of the Washington D.C. metro area. Very nice.
Northern Virginia.
Yeah. The wilds of Northern Virginia. Yeah. All right, Pete, mailbag.
Ooh.
Unless you got something else.
No.
After the mailbag, we've been getting some really good mail. KA5WPL, Paul, is another recruit for the Color Burst Liberation Army. He's been inducted and sworn in. I have sent him the 3.579 megahertz Color Burst crystal. He wanted this one signed by SolderSmoke, so it's got a SolderSmoke symbol on the side. We think this gives it some extra mojo. And Paul has pledged, promised, sworn that he will build a Michigan Mighty Mite. And so we wish him a lot of good luck with that. We heard from Ron, G4GXO, on Bell-Thorn.
Bell-Thorn.
Oh.
Bell-Thorn.
And he explains the origins of the word Bell-Thorn and gives a lot of interesting SSB homebrew history about how it was, was put together and everything else. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, I got an email from Ron 2 days ago. He is building up a test rig with an SI5351.
Yay!
And I know, is going to take phase noise data. So we're going to have another piece of information about the SI5351.
Got it. I hope he supports what we're saying.
Oh, he does. He does. He's looking at certain things. And so I think we're going to have more data from people doing this stuff independently. But he's not using an Arduino. Well, he likes to work with PICs. So he's written the code for a PIC. So he might be using a 16F877 or one of those higher end type PICs. So I'm going to keep in touch with him, and I'm going to see what his data looks like. So we may have more data points on phase noise. Excellent.
It was really interesting. His letter and his explanation of the background history of the Bell-Thorn and the Eden transceiver.
Yeah, Eden9.
Eden9. It was 9 because the guy didn't understand that it was the 9th division of the schematic. And he thought that was the name of the rig. It became the Eden9.
Yeah.
Really cool stuff. Anyway, good message from another great message from the UK. Rupert G6HVY. Rupert Goodwins. What a great name,
yeah.
Rupert Goodwins. And I was intrigued by the name, and I Googled him. This guy is a guru. He's a tech wizard. He's a real part of the kind of the digital glitterati. He wrote for all kinds of tech magazines in the UK. Worked for, I think, Sinclair Computers when they were really early on. Built some really interesting stuff that is now at the museum at Bletchley Park and other places. wrote a column for ZDNet for a long time. So this guy, Rupert's got some really interesting background. G6HVY. He sent me two messages. The first, he was about a video about the expedition, the Tiki, the radio operators with Thor Heyerdahl on the Tiki that went across the Pacific. And you and I talked about this. The one thing that really intrigued me was they had this powder, this magic powder with them, and they put the magic powder in this tube, and they stuck it in the water, and out of the end of the tube came hydrogen gas, which they used to fill up a balloon that supported their antenna. Now, we want some of that magic powder.
Yeah.
That would be really cool.
Yeah.
We might not be able to get it because it seemed like it might be highly explosive, but it looked really cool. That was then Rupert came to me with I posted a message about my low frequency oscillations with the CCI amp, and he came back and gave some very encouraging advice. And he said, "Look, some of these problems are so mysterious that they would even defy the logical powers of Mr. Spock." I said, "Rupert, you made me feel better." Michele, 9A3XZ, building bidexes in Croatia and sending in videos. Really cool. They got the same little Nokia screen that you came up with there, the colorful screen. Beautiful job, Michele. Good to hear from you. Dean, AC9JQ, his TIA also has that beautiful colorful screen, and he uses the SI5351, right, Pete?
Yep, absolutely.
It's beautiful. Now, I loved the enclosure that he came up with.
Oh, yeah.
But he told me not to do it. He said it was too much work. So I guess I'm back with the wooden cigar boxes here. I don't know, Dean. They look so good, I might want to do it. We've been hearing a lot from Brian, KV4ZS, and he is pledged to build an LBS receiver as his next project. We are counseling him not to bite off more than he could chew. Don't go right to the bidex. Do what Pete prescribes and build the LBS receiver first, and then build the LBS rig. He says he's going to do it. Guys, if you've built an oscillator and you want to go the next step, build that LBS receiver, that direct conversion receiver that Pete talked about. It's the way to go. When you build a receiver, then you will really be entering the hallowed halls of the successful radio amateur homebrewers.
Yep.
You'll hear like Gregorian chants as you solder that final connection.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Dave Anderson in the UK was the guy who chimed in with antenna advice for Pete. That was great. An early example of the use of the blog.
Yes, and he said rotate it from the base and use a sleeve.
There you go.
Yeah.
Rotate it from the base.
Yeah.
Beautiful stuff. And then finally we got a message from, well, not finally, but we got a message from Steve Smith, Steve Snort Rosin Smith out there on the left coast. And he is moving in the same house, but into a new and more hospitable, temperature-controlled ham shack after many years out in the garage. Congratulations, Steve. You must be behaving yourself. They're letting you in from the garage. Very good. Congratulations on that. Pete, there was discussion about whether your fanatical addiction to the construction of SSB transceivers might require your friends to organize what they call these days an intervention.
Yeah, you're right.
And, and you said, no. And then a couple of days later you sent me the list. Pete has built, just in talking about SSB transceivers, how many?
Well, I said 11, but now it's 13.
Yeah, you gotta be sitting at that meeting and say, my name is Pete, and the call is N6QW, and I have an addiction.
Yeah.
I can't stop building SSB transceivers.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 W7ZOI 20-meter radios, 1 KWM4, 1 20-40-meter rig, 1 Zia, 1 LBS, the LBS2, 1 17-meter radio, the Bell-Thorn 3,
Yes.
J-Bomb,
Yep.
1 20-meter dual-gate MOSFET, and now, most recently?
I took the 30-meter CW transceiver, and I'm converting that over to a 40-meter single sideband transceiver. And that's got a 6-pole 5 megahertz filter in it. Actually, it's pretty good. And then another one that I'm building that's going to be kind of really small, almost like a handy-talkie.
Yeah. But that's just SSB transceivers. You've built many other rigs too, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, well I don't want to talk about all the vacuum tube rigs I built, and actually I didn't include the 2 CW transceivers that I have.
That's right. I know. Well, then I was thinking, man, he's really gone off the deep edge here. An intervention may be needed. But then I looked at my own count.
Yeah.
And I just looked around here. I got 4 double sideband transceivers, 3 SSB transceivers, 1 standalone SSB transmitter, 1 tube-type superhet, at least 1 CW station. So I might be needing some help too here, Pete.
Yeah, you're only 3 behind me.
Yours are much nicer. Man, we have gone to 1 hour. This is a new record, but that's okay. We're allowed because it's the special edition. Have we missed anything? Did we go?
No, but I wanted to go back to the very first part. I think the first time that I actually emailed you was when you were in Rome. And did you have a station in a closet?
That my shack looked like a closet.
I remember you were emailing and saying, "Yeah, I'm looking out the window here, and it was a very small space." It must. I don't think people realize when you operate from other countries, there may not be the availability of space like you have here. I mean, the areas tend to be pretty flats and apartments tend to be pretty small, so you're really challenged. But I think you remember something like you had a really small shack.
I had a small shack there. It was really small, but I did get the workbench in there, and most of the gear here, some of it was in storage, but we do have a bit more room now. But it's never enough.
Nope.
It's already filling up.
No.
I'm already starting to spill out into the living room.
Uh-oh.
Got to watch my step. I'm going to be sent out to the garage like poor old Steve Smith.
Or like me.
Hey, this has been fun.
Yeah, it sure has. And again, congratulations on the 10th anniversary, Bill. Really, really amazing. Really great. And you can just only look at the people who follow the blog and send us emails and that. You really made a mark here. So happy 10th anniversary.
You have saved the show, Pete. we were sliding into oblivion until you came along and revitalized things, so I thank you. And thank all the listeners and everybody who's made it fun. And really, everybody, the great part of the show is the interaction with the listeners, and so many great people are listening and chiming in, and we have a lot of fun with it. And let's look forward to another 10 years at least.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to say 7-3s from the left coast.
7-3 from the wilds of Northern Virginia. 7-3, Pete.
We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Ooh, that's awesome.
The SolderSmoke podcast is produced once or twice a month using roadkill computers in an electronics workshop somewhere in the wilds of Northern Virginia. The podcast is available via iTunes and directly from our website, SolderSmoke.com. Our blog, the SolderSmoke Daily News, is at soldersmoke.blogspot.com. Send email to SolderSmoke, that's one word, at yahoo.com. SolderSmoke is listener-supported, and there are many ways you can help keep the podcast going. Please spread the word. Let your friends know about SolderSmoke, the podcast, and our blog. Put links to the podcast and the blog on your websites. Buy a copy of the critically acclaimed book, SolderSmoke, Global Adventures in Wireless Electronics, available from Lulu.com. Begin all your visits to Amazon via the Amazon link on our blog page. In this way, SolderSmoke gets a commission from anything you buy on Amazon. Buy some of our attractive SolderSmoke t-shirts, coffee mugs, and bumper stickers at the SolderSmoke store at cafepress.com. If you have a small business, consider advertising on the podcast or on the blog. Our rates are reasonable and our staff is friendly. If none of this appeals to you but you still want to help, well, we have a donation button in the upper left-hand corner of the blog page. However you choose to help, we thank you for your support.
Ciao, bravi ragazzi!